So good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 5. Today's tutorial is all about the written assessment. I'm going to be talking through some tips and strategies and addressing some questions and concerns about the written assessment. So I'll start off with a few fairly straightforward questions and then build to some of the more tricky ones. And the first question I've gotten a couple of times is whether you have to follow the example structure that I've posted on Moodle. And you absolutely don't have to follow that. The most important thing is that you give a clear and concise answer. And the way that you achieve that is going to be different to different for everyone. You've all got different writing styles. You all approach this with a slightly different perspective. So in no way do you have to follow the example answer structure. I've just given you that as a tool to help you think through what some of the issues might be. If it helps you structure your answer, then by all means use it. But you're certainly not tied into answering things in that particular way. One thing that might, without giving anything away, one thing that might be especially relevant there is thinking about if merits review was available, there might be a bit of an overlap between accessing reasons for decisions through merits review and then discussion of the merits review itself. And obviously there's a bit of overlap in terms of the question of, is merits review available? You don't need to repeat yourself twice there. You just need to pick one or the other, and then just say, when you then come to that issue for the second answer, you can refer it to the other answer, and you can structure it in either way. The marks for that are allocated towards the merits review question. But if you put it in your reasons for decision section, you can still get those, and they'll just get sort of brought down to the question 2. So that's something where the sort of example answer structure, and I think I've highlighted that in the answer structure anyway, is, you can refer back and forward between them. But the overarching principle is if the answer structure is not working for you, you definitely don't have to follow that. Similarly, in terms of sort of formatting requirements, whether there are any, you do have to use AGLC 4th edition. But beyond that, there's not really too much. The most important thing is that it's easy to read on a screen. So I wouldn't go picking any funky fonts or anything like that. But I'm not going to be, getting out the ruler to check if your margins are the right length or anything like that. Same with cover sheets. Put one on so that it's clearly yours, but don't waste too much time making it, a really pretty cover sheet or anything like that. Just as long as it's simple and straightforward and easy to read, that's the main thing. I've also got a series of questions that I would sort of lump together in terms of creative thinking. And it's really encouraging for me to see these kinds of questions because it shows that you're really thinking outside the box. But I probably do need to sort of caution you in the sense that when you start going too far outside the box, there's no marks allocated for that because I can't possibly predict that that's where you're going to go. And so the thing to keep in mind with this assignment is that obviously at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is assess your knowledge of administrative law principles, the access to information provisions, and the merits review system. And once you start straying too far from that, then, obviously there's going to be no marks attached to it. So just sort of some of the examples of things that I've been asked have been in terms of the AAT's, sorry, not the AAT, Centrelink's internal review structure as a threshold before accessing an AAT review. In practice, absolutely, that's how it works. For the sake of this course, we simplify it a bit. So you don't need to mention things like that. I had a great question about would Patricia be, it sounds like she might be eligible for JobKeeper. Should we put that in? In practice, yeah, sure, probably. From the perspective of this assessment, there's just no room to allocate marks to things like that. So I'm encouraged by your creative thinking, but make sure you're keeping it really focused on the material in this unit, right? This isn't a research essay, so you don't need to be, running down kind of rabbit holes like that. So, obviously some creative thought is good in terms of sort of the critical thinking about the key issues, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but don't go too far. And if you're in any doubt as to whether you've gone too far or not, please do just feel free to shoot me a quick email and just say, am I on the right track or not? I obviously can't say a definitive yes or no, but I'll guide you to sort of rein it in a little bit if I think that you're kind of going too far down the rabbit hole there. And now we come to the word count, which has been by far the biggest concern that people have had so far, which is fair enough, right? So it's 1,500 words total, and that's designed to be a challenging but achievable word limit. And that's for two reasons. The first reason is keeping a sort of a tight word count means that you really have to focus on the issues and really sort of hone your thinking. And the second is that brevity is a really important aspect of legal writing skills. Letters to clients, submissions to court, briefing notes, all that sort of stuff. No one wants to be reading pages and pages and pages and pages. Writing briefly, communicating your points succinctly is a really, really critical skill. And so, in giving you a too big a word count doesn't actually do you any favors in the long run. So yes, 1,500 words is a tight word limit, but it's definitely achievable. I think the example answer that I've put together is, let me double check, 1471. And, I don't, in saying that, I don't want to be saying, oh, well, I did it, so can you. What I mean by that is that it's achievable in the sense that there's definitely enough words in 1,500 words to cover all the issues if you're really direct about it. And then, of course, if you go through and you edit carefully and things like that, you should be able to reasonably comfortably come in under the 1,500 words. And we'll talk through some sort of strategies for doing that in a moment. On the issue of the word count, I've also been asked whether it's a strict 750 word split between the two questions. It's not specifically allocated as that. It's just the 1,500 total. The marks for both questions are the same. And so that should give you an indication that both answers should be roughly the same length. But there's, it's not strictly enforced 750 and 750. And you might find, everyone's going to be a bit different. And the way that you explain things will be different for each person. As a general rule, you might find that your answer to question 2 is a little bit longer than question 1. But, that's certainly not a requirement. So you might find you do 700 on question 1 and 800 on question 2 or something. That's not a problem. It's the 1,500 total that's what really matters. One thing that you can do to sort of save a little bit of space in your word limit is to set up some abbreviations. So, for example, the first time you refer to the Freedom of Information Act, just in brackets put FOI Act, and then every time after that you can just say FOI Act, FOI Act. Those sorts of things I don't have a problem with, and that can be, a useful way of just sort of shaving words off at each turn. So just a couple of quick questions that have come up on the chat that are relevant here. Yes, the word count includes footnotes. Can you put the names of the Social Security Acts in footnotes using AGLC? Yeah, of course, and you should be doing it. But having said that, if you've established an abbreviation for the Social Security Act and the Social Security Administration Acts, you can put those in the footnotes as just SS Act or SSA Act, and that's fine too. And then finally, in terms of the example. Okay, so there's a question. Your example is in dot points. I thought you wanted full sentences. Sorry, I should be a little bit clearer. I've got the example structure, which is different from the example answer. The example answer is what I've done up as sort of a marking tool. You guys obviously don't get to see that because that's got all the answers. And that's the thing that comes in under 1,500 words. Something that is a good, I suppose, rough guide is that the example answer structure comes in at a tiny bit over 1,000 words. And that includes, plenty of notes about, you could do this here, or you could say this here, and things like that. Yes, it doesn't have all the descriptions and the referencing's not exactly right, but that gives you a rough indication. And there's all the sort of the fluff at the start telling you, what this is all about and how to do it and stuff. So that should give you a rough indication that, even if you just substituted everything in here in the example answer structure for your answer, you probably have about 500 words to play with in terms of your critical analysis and your discussion and things like that. But absolutely, you do need to be answering in full sentences. So just to confirm, footnotes are included in the total. Yes, footnotes are included. Bibliography and headings. If you're going crazy with headings, don't go crazy with headings. A few headings is good. And if you're reasonable with your headings, then that's, it shouldn't make too much of a difference whether they're included or not, because you probably only have, 7 or 8 words in the headings. Bibliography doesn't really need to count because it's just repeating what's in the footnotes anyway. Okay, now we're getting really specific in the questions. So is a bibliography required? No, I don't think. I'm pretty sure the AGLC is just the footnotes and you're not required to do a bibliography. So I'll say this, and this is on the recording, so everyone gets to hear this straight away. You don't have to do a bibliography. Your footnotes have to be there, and your footnotes have to be right, and they're included in the word count. You don't have to do a bibliography, but if you choose to do one for whatever reason, that won't be counted in the word count. That makes sense? Cool. Memorandum, is there a specific format? No, not really. Just make it clear. We'll talk a little bit about writing style in a moment, but there's not a specific format or structure for a memorandum for this exercise anyway. Okay, so that's setting up abbreviations and a slight detour into referencing. The key thing to coming in at the word limit or under is to be analytical rather than descriptive. And that's important just generally because it's a better way of showcasing your knowledge of the material, but it's especially sort of useful in a practical sense because when you do it well, it actually uses fewer words than being really descriptive. So what do I mean by being analytical and not descriptive? So an analytical answer is going to be one that includes nuance and attention to detail. You consider both sides of the argument. So what is Centrelink going to say and how could you counter that? You show insight by clearly identifying what the big issues are, which ones are the hardest to solve, what are the most important things to address for Patricia. And so a good example of that would be, if you were asking for documents under a freedom of information request, you could spend your entire word count coming up with documents to ask for in an FOI request, and every possible bit of information that you could ever want to know, and every possible argument that could ever be come up with to rebut that, and every possible argument you could come up to rebut those, you could easily blow out your words just doing that. But that's sort of, it's a bit of a scattergun approach. What's better, other than, of course, not using up all your words on one issue, it's far better to show that you've got a really good handle on the content and a really good handle on the issues by developing sort of a really targeted approach to pick out, 2 or 3, I don't want to give out the exact number, 4, 7, don't do 7, just a couple of key documents that you'd want in an FOI request, and why those are the most important documents. Because you could ask for anything, right? You could, you could ask for Patricia's tax returns for the past 10 years. And that might be, useful somehow in some way, but it doesn't really show that it doesn't really show that you've across the issues, right? Whereas if you can identify just a small number of documents and really clearly explain why you want them, how you're going to get them, what Centrelink might do to try and stop you, and how you can get around that, then that's a much better way of demonstrating your knowledge and your understanding of the issues, and also, the freedom of information law and things like that. Conversely, a really descriptive answer is one that includes really, long descriptions or explanations of the law. Block quotes are the worst example of this. Please, for my sake too, but mostly for your sake, please don't just copy and paste bits of legislation, right? The easiest way to chew up your word count is to say, we want to get these documents under freedom of information request. Section 11 is the relevant legislative provision here. Section 11 says blah, 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 and you copy and paste it, right? You'll blow out your whole word count just with that stuff. And it doesn't tell me, it tells me that you know how to read and copy and paste. And it doesn't tell me a lot more than that. Whereas if you can develop a really targeted response that identifies that Section 11 is the right provision, obviously, but then can really concisely explain what the effect of Section 11 is and how it's going to apply here, then not only have you demonstrated your knowledge, which is a few marks, but then you've also demonstrated that you can apply it. And that's a few more marks. And you've done it in the, one sentence, maybe 2 sentences. Whereas if you're really overly descriptive, you'll find that you'll spend 3, 4, 5 sentences just explaining what it is. And you still can only get those couple of marks for knowledge of the legal principles, right? So really focusing your attention on the application and showing critical insight by being able to identify how it's going to apply is really important. One, because it'll get you a better mark because it tells me that you know what you're doing, but it's also really important from the word count perspective because it means that you're going to use far fewer words. So my main advice is that if you're struggling to come in under the word count, have a look at your answer and have a look at the parts where you're explaining what the law is and what it does. And those would be the first bits that I would look at rewriting, and rewriting in a more concise way, right? If you've taken 3 sentences to explain one, one section of the act, have a look at, can you do that in half that amount of space? And most of the time you probably will be able to. If you've got any quotes, like direct quotes of legislation, I would strongly reconsider doing that. Paraphrase it. You know, these provisions are wordy. Paraphrase it, and you'll save yourself half the words right there. And paraphrase it because you show me that you understand what the actual effect of the law is. Same with block quotes from a judgment or something like that. A small quote that's really, really relevant and really, really targeted can be okay, but anything longer than a sentence, I would be thinking really, really hard about what it adds and whether you'd be better served by paraphrasing it. So those are probably my main tips for dealing with the word count, is to just really make sure that you're not being too descriptive, because that's the easiest trap to fall into, especially with something like admin law, right? It is a bit confusing. There is a temptation to really try and explain things because you want me to know that you know what's going on, and you think that the way to do that is to just give me 5 sentences on what it is and what it does. You are far better served in terms of showing me that you know what you're doing by giving me a briefer summary of what it is and then giving me a really good explanation of what its effect is on Patricia, or in other problems, whoever the client is, or whatever. So the application sort of kills 2 birds with 1 stone in most cases. You still need some explanation and description, but really, really make sure that you're not going too overboard with it, because that's, in my experience, that's the thing that really blows out your word count. In terms of other sort of tips and tricks, if you're getting really stuck just trying to find how to kind of get out of the starting blocks with this essay, which is understandable because it's a big task. There's a lot of information that gets thrown at you in terms of the facts. Then there's the letter from Centrelink. Then there's these legislative provisions. It's easy to sort of read through it and feel very lost. Typically, in dealing with legal problems, we start with the issues and then work from there. And if that's worked for you, that's great. But if you're feeling a bit stuck, one thing that you can try doing is flipping things around, and instead go to the example structure guide and just try and write out a few dot points for each thing. For the reasons for decision, just sort of work out, okay, so this line says this, can I find anything in the facts that relates to that? And then just go one line at a time. Can you find something? Can you find something? Can you find something? And remember that not everything will apply, right? In reasons for decision, we've talked about 3 different ways of getting reasons, but they're alternative avenues rather than, you don't need all 3, you only need 1. So, in going through that structure, you don't need every single thing, but just go through and start to do the things that you can. And then you'll quickly find that you're building momentum, building your answer up that way. And then once you've got that sort of foundation, then you can sort of take a step back and go, okay, I can start to see where the issues are here. I can start to see where there might be problems for the client and things like that. So sort of flipping the strategy can be really useful there.
Sorry, Jacob, can I just ask a quick question about something you just said?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Just in regards to the 3 ways, the different ways that you can apply for the reasons for decision without like asking a direct question, but if, let's say, for instance, hypothetically, that you had someone who was eligible for through all of the ways, but obviously if one way is available, you have to go that way, then do we still mention, like, do you want us just briefly to say, that, okay, they could apply through this way or this way, but, like, I'm just not, do you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. Hypothetically,
Why do we have to go?
If merits review was available to you in this essay, and that meant that Section 1311 of the Administrative Decision Judicial Review Act meant that you should use the merits review scheme for accessing reasons rather than the general scheme under Administrative Decision Judicial Review Act, I would mention section 1311, and I wouldn't mention anything else about the general duty under the ADJR. Hypothetically, if that was something that was relevant to this assessment, that's the way that I would do it. And so, and you can see there, right? There's the 3 different bullet points in the answer structure, but if you only need one, then you're saving a lot of words there too, rather than having to step through all 3, things like that.
So we acknowledge that they're there, but choose which path we should be choosing, hypothetically.
Well, I can say without, there's nothing hypothetical about pick one and do that. Hypothetically, if it was the merits review pathway, I would mention section 1311 and I'd leave everything else. If it was, if there was a specific provision in the Act, then you would only need to use that. If merits review wasn't available and there wasn't a specific provision in the Act, you'd go straight to the Administrative Decision Review Act.
Okay, thank you.
So just to sort of follow up on Leanne's question there as well, in terms of can we omit things that we feel are irrelevant to the matter at hand in terms of the structure guide? Yeah, absolutely. Not every bullet point is necessarily going to be relevant to this particular written assessment. If you think that something's not going to apply or not relevant, you don't have to include that. Is there a 10% allowance in the word count? No, so it's a hard cap at the 1,500 words for that one. So no 10% allowance there, unfortunately. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask before I turn the recording off? So any questions that people are happy to have included in the recording? Otherwise, I'll stop it and we'll open it up to discussion. One quick one: how many authorities should we use? I can't answer that one. Yeah, I can't answer that one. You should anything that you any legal principle that you use needs to be supported by, the relevant piece of legislation or the relevant case. But yeah, I can't give an exact number. Sorry, can I just confirm the memo in question is an example? I'm not too sure what that question means. Sorry. Are you talking about the letter from Centrelink? So the letter from Centrelink forms part of the assessment, and so it's not an example in the sense that it's it needs to be included in your discussion, but yeah, it's not. I suppose it's an example of a kind of letter that one might receive from Centrelink, but it's not an example that can just be sort of ignored in terms of the assessment. Where do I find the hypothetical answer structure from week 4 freedom of information? I'll have to get back to you on that one. I don't know that I necessarily did one for week 4 because we were talking about some other issues. I'll get back to you on that one, Audrey. Are there 1 or 2 decisions to be analysed? Is the determination intermediate decision? I can't really answer that one too directly, but the decision that's relevant is the decision that's been communicated to Patricia in the letter from Centrelink. And that's probably about all I can say on that one. Alrighty.
Jacob, with the with the memo being addressed to Patricia, so I suggested I've had an example before of something similar where even though it was addressed to the client, we went to address to say this is to review your decision. I would recommend you do this and you do that. Do you know what I mean? Because we're talking directly to her. Like, so I'm just confirming that's how you want it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I don't have strong feelings about that sort of stuff. As in sort of the question, if I understand you right, is do we say, dear Patricia, we think you should do this, blah, 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 or, you know, the issues is therefore I would advise Patricia to do X, Y, Z sort of, you know.
Pretty much. And when I'm analysing it, you know, when you're trying to do an analysis or an application, it's weird to say, you know, because you've done this or then this is, you know what I mean? So I'm just making sure that I'm trying to write it that way, but it's a bit, feels a bit strange. So I'm just wondering whether I do address it to her directly or Yeah,
absolutely. I don't have strong feelings. What I do have strong feelings about is that your answer is clear and easy to follow. For some people, it'll feel smoother and easier to write more clearly by directing advice to Patricia. For some people, like you say, it might just feel a bit weird and clunky, and you'd rather sort of stay a bit more in the hypothetical realm and talk more about, you know, these are the issues, so this is probably what I'd tell Patricia to do and things like that. I don't mind either way. It's
as long as we're not as long as we're not addressing it like to a barrister or somebody whose level of understanding may be a little bit higher than you're sending it to a client. So I guess as long as you address that kind of then
that feels like a separate question, so I'll circle back to that one.
Yeah, that too.
No, that's fine. So in terms of, you know, should you be writing like sort of directly to Patricia or not, I don't mind. Pick whatever's clearest for you, but also stick with it. So be consistent throughout. Don't sometimes be addressing it directly to her and sometimes, you know, sort of be talking as if she's not in the room kind of thing. So consistency and clarity are more important than whichever sort of style you actually use. The question about sort of what level to pitch it at is a good one. And I had a really great question in the emails sort of saying, you know, oh, you mentioned that Patricia sort of left school and doesn't have any other formal qualifications. So should we use that to influence our writing style and things like that? Which is a good pickup, and you don't have to quite go that far, but it's good to assume, you know, you're writing for someone who doesn't quite know what's going on, because that will make you think really clearly and really distill things and you know, simplify things, because, you know, no client, regardless of what level of education they've got, wants to read, you know, pages and pages of cut and paste legislation and things like that. So you want to keep it targeted and brief, and you want to showcase your knowledge by being able to explain things. You don't just assume, oh, if I say section 13, she'll know what that means. But at the same time, you need to step out step by step by step by step. Oh, the AAT is a body established in 1975, and it like, so it's a balance. And where you find that balance is being clear but succinct. Does that make sense?
Thank you. That's awesome. That were my main things as I was writing. So thank you.
Cool. Any final questions before I stop the recording, and then we can, you know, I'll open it up and you can ask questions that you don't want recorded. Excellent. Alrighty. Well, I'll stop the recording there. If you're joining us on Moodle or on YouTube, please do have a look at Moodle on Tuesday afternoon, probably, for a summary of the discussion that we're about to have now. I'll be taking notes, and I'll be making sure that you don't miss any information. So you won't be disadvantaged in any way, but we'll stop it